Hey guys, tonight we step into the restless waters of the Mediterranean, where waves whisper against old harbours and fishermen's nets sometimes catch more than just sardines. Picture the moonlight silvering the sea, and imagine for a moment that beneath those gentle ripples lies a fortune that once belonged to Rome itself, gold enough to rattle the coffers of emperors glinting silently in the sand for nearly 2,000 years. That's the treasure we're chasing tonight, not a fairy tale chest, not a dragon's hoard, but something that history insists once existed, and then simply disappeared. And if you're wondering whether you would have survived 2 weeks on a Roman cargo ship, let me assure you, between seasickness, cramped decks, and salted fish 3 meals a day, you probably wouldn't. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now find yourself a cozy seat or a soft bed, let your mind begin to unwind, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story begins not with the glitter of gold, but with the quiet hum of trade. Rome at the height of its empire is obsessed with movement armies, marching merchants, sailing coins, clinking from one end of the known world to the other. Gold is more than wealth here, it is a promise of stability, a way to pay legions and to fund bread and circuses that keep restless citizens pacified. Every Roman denarius carries not just metal, but the weight of politics. If the empire's gold supply falters, the illusion of eternal Rome cracks like plaster on an old wall. Historians still argue whether the empire's eventual decline was tied directly to financial mismanagement, or whether military overreach mattered more, but the connection between treasure and survival was always present. Roman ships become the arteries of this golden flow. They are built broad and heavy, designed not for speed, but for carrying weight amphorae filled with oil grain and wine, and tucked carefully within wooden chests, gold coins bound for imperial treasuries. One mainstream fact makes this vivid archaeological digs along Roman harbours like Portus near Ostia have revealed warehouses stacked with goods, clear evidence of Rome's staggering logistics network. The empire ran on cargo ships as much as it did on legions, and yet the sea is a treacherous ally. Storms rise without warning, reefs loom invisible, and even the most skilled captain is a guest on Neptune's domain. Here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient Roman writers claimed that some captains would carry live chickens on board, releasing them to walk around before a voyage. If the chickens ate hungrily, it was a good omen. If they refused, the trip was delayed. Imagine a crew of hardened sailors glaring at a sulky hen, waiting for it to peck a bit of grain so they could get moving. You can almost hear the grumbling. We've got orders from the emperor, but sure, let's wait until Clucky feels snackish. Still, superstition filled the gaps where science faltered, and when you're sailing with fortunes aboard, you take no chances. Somewhere in this restless exchange of goods and omens, a great treasure leaves port. Perhaps it sails from Alexandria, heavy with Egyptian grain and imperial taxes gathered in gold. Perhaps it comes from Hispania, where mines yield precious metal that emperors crave. Or maybe it departs from Carthage loaded with tribute that the Mediterranean swallows before it can reach Rome. The records are tantalizingly incomplete, leaving modern scholars to puzzle over which voyage carried the gold that never arrived. Did clerks deliberately lose the paperwork to cover corruption? Did storms erase not only ships but entire columns of ink? The uncertainty feels deliberate, as though someone long ago preferred silence to confession. Picture the scene: a Roman galley creaking with strain sails stiff with windrowers pulling in rhythm chests of coins, stacked beneath the deck. The sea glitters deceptively calm. Then clouds gather the wind shifts, and what began as a routine journey tilts toward disaster. Lightning forks across black water waves hammer the hull, and men who once boasted of their bravery mutter prayers to any god they can remember. Gold clinks as the ship shudders, the sound sharp as a taunt. Did the crew fight until the last plank splintered? Did survivors cling to wreckage, watching the treasure slip into the dark? No saga tells us. Only silence follows, and silence breeds imagination. Fishermen whisper of ghost lights under the waves. Divers centuries later claim to hear faint ringing as if coins still strike together in the current. One tale insists that a fisherman pulled up a golden coin in his net only to throw it back in fear, convinced it was cursed. Historians still argue whether these stories are the embroidered echoes of real shipwrecks or nothing more than fireside inventions. Yet the Mediterranean is full of wrecks, hundreds catalogued, many more undiscovered, and each one is a candidate for holding the missing wealth. Meanwhile, Rome continues as if nothing happened. New coins are minted, new ships depart, and the Empire's appetite never wanes. But beneath the waves, a fortune waits its value undiminished by centuries. Think of it, coins stamped with the faces of emperors long turned to dust resting side by side in the sand. Not one or two, but potentially thousands. Enough to sway battles, to fund legions, to shift history if it had surfaced instead of sinking. The sea holds the power to edit history in its own quiet way, and in this case it may have edited Rome itself. So here we are drifting between fact and possibility. A treasure leaves port, but it never arrives. Records falter, storms intervene, memory fades, and silence takes over. Yet the story refuses to die, carried not in Roman ledgers, but in our own fascination with what lies just out of reach. Gold, after all, is patient. It does not rot or rust. It waits. And tonight we wait with it, leaning into the mystery as the waves whisper and the centuries roll on. Rome's golden veins do not flow solely from mines. In distant mountains they pulse through conquest tribute and the long meticulous grind of taxation. The empire, vast enough to make modern bureaucracies look modest, gathers its wealth in countless ways. Grain shipments measured in tons, sacks of coins collected at tolls, and whole treasuries emptied from conquered cities. The image of Rome as an eternal feast is not entirely wrong. Gold and silver flow in such quantities that senators sometimes complain of being blinded by reflected light in the forum. Yet wealth on that scale is never safe, never stable, and the very abundance that fills Rome's coffers also fuels its deepest anxieties. Empires that grow rich quickly also grow fragile, like a banquet table straining under too much weight. Mainstream history reminds us that Rome's expansion into Spain gave it access to some of the richest silver mines in the ancient world. Vast networks of tunnels stretch under Iberian hillsides where enslaved workers hacked through rock day and night, sending back rivers of bullion. This flow of silver and gold allowed the Roman state to mint denarii in staggering numbers, fueling armies, roads, and monuments that still stand today. Without those mines, the marble arches and grand arenas we associate with Roman pride might never have existed. The stone of empire was held together with the glue of precious metal, a fact that glimmers uncomfortably whenever we admire the ruins. And yet Rome's economy is not only mines and mints, it thrives on conquest. Each new province becomes a piggy bank smashed open with swords. When Lucullus marches into Asia Minor, when Caesar strides into Gaul, the outcome is not just political dominance, but wagon loads of plundered treasure. Imagine entire libraries of scrolls being catalogued, whole temples, stripped of votive offerings, and statues of gods shipped across the sea. A Roman general does not retire quietly. He stages a triumph, parading golden vessels, exotic animals, and trembling captives through the streets. Citizens cheer, coins are tossed, and everyone forgets that this glittering bounty was once sacred somewhere else. Quirky tidbits about this wealth circulate even in Roman times. One story tells of senators so bloated with riches that they sprinkle gold dust into their wine not for flavour, since let's face it, metallic notes are not exactly tasty, but for the sheer thrill of swallowing wealth. Another tale insists that a noblewoman once wore a gown embroidered with pearls so heavy she could hardly walk, and her attendants had to hold her upright at banquets. These excesses, whether exaggerated or true, make the empire look like a stage where wealth is costume, and everyone is competing for the most dramatic role. But the river of gold flowing into Rome is never smooth. Coins where thin treasuries are depleted by endless wars, and emperors face the eternal problem of keeping armies loyal. Historians still argue whether the constant cycle of looting and spending created a kind of economic addiction. Was Rome dependent on conquest to keep its economy afloat, doomed to falter once expansion stopped? Or did the system contain enough resilience through trade, taxation, and savings to endure without new provinces to strip bare? The debate flickers like a lamp in a draughty hall, never quite extinguished but never offering enough light to settle the matter. As Rome grows, so do the mechanics of its financial world. Tax collectors, moneylenders, and imperial agents swarm the provinces, ensuring that nothing slips away uncounted. Local elites, eager to keep their privileges, funnel wealth upward, sometimes enriching themselves along the way. The sheer complexity of Roman finance becomes legendary, with contracts written on wax tablets, ledgers maintained by scribes, and chests of coins shipped by mule trains across hundreds of miles. One can almost picture a clerk sighing, calculating columns by lamplight, and dreaming of a world where numbers stop multiplying. If you've ever groaned at doing taxes, remember the Romans practically invented the art of turning frustration into financial paperwork. The gold and silver flowing into Rome build not only monuments but also illusions. Citizens begin to think of their empire as unshakable, eternal, immune to the forces that undo lesser states. They laugh at the idea of running out of wealth. After all, every season brings another caravan, another tribute, another ship heavy with ingots. And yet beneath the marble and bravado, anxiety lingers. What happens when the mines run dry, when conquered people stop paying, when ships sink before reaching the harbour? Rome's relationship with its treasure is never just pride, it is paranoia dressed in purple. In the quiet halls of villas and palaces, some Romans whispered darker thoughts. Wealth is a magnet for envy, for rebellion, for betrayal. Emperors fall not only because of swords, but because of empty treasuries, and senators plot when stipends shrink. Gold becomes more than metal. It becomes fate. To lose it is to lose power, and to guard it is to live forever under threat. Thus, the empire that conquers half the known world finds itself haunted by a simple, terrible fear: the possibility of treasure lost, buried, or swallowed by the sea, never to return. The sea can be the most generous of hosts and the most merciless of thieves. On calm mornings, it lays itself out like a sheet of polished bronze sun, glittering as though someone scattered coins across its surface. On stormy nights, though, it rises and roars as if trying to reclaim every last coin ever thrown upon it. For Rome, whose power stretched across 3 continents, the sea was both lifeline and gamble. Ships left ports heavy with grain olive oil marble and most tantalizingly gold. They returned with spices, silks, and stories. But not every vessel made the round trip. Some slipped under the waves, their cargo still waiting in the deep like forgotten bank accounts, earning no interest. Archaeology offers tantalizing confirmation of this. Divers exploring wrecks off the coast of Italy, Spain, and even distant Britain have pulled up amphorae stamped with official Roman seals, their clay still smelling faintly of ancient resin when cracked open. Historians point out that the Romans mastered shipbuilding to such a degree that their cargo vessels could carry hundreds of tons. Imagine trying to parallel park that in a tight Mediterranean harbour. Yet despite their skill, the sea was never fully tamed. Mainstream fact: Roman engineers developed remarkable harbour works. Caesarea Maritima in Judea, for example, boasted concrete piers that hardened underwater. Even so, their technology didn't prevent tempests from scattering fleets like dice tossed on a tavern table. One particular treasure tale drifts again and again into whispered speculation, a fleet rumoured to have carried vast payrolls for legions stationed in Gaul and Germania, only to vanish between Massilia, modern Marseille, and the coast of Hispania. Scholars still argue whether such a fleet ever truly existed. Some think it's an invention, a fisherman's exaggeration inflated by generations of retelling. Others suggest Roman officials quietly buried the story to avoid admitting they'd misplaced enough gold to bankroll a small empire. Losing your keys is one thing, losing an entire treasury is another. To picture what that might have looked like, imagine a convoy of stout, broad-bellied ships, straining under the weight of stamped ingots and heavy sacks. Each vessel creaked as waves slapped against its hull, and sailors muttered prayers to Neptune between hauling ropes. Roman merchants were practical men, not prone to embellishing storms, but even they admitted that the Bay of Biscay could feel like a dice roll against fate. A quirky tidbit: one surviving Roman inscription thanks the gods for a safe passage past the mouth of Hades. Historians debate whether this was a poetic flourish or a genuine local nickname for some particularly nasty stretch of water. Either way, if you're naming your harbour, Hades maybe take the long way around. Now the sea doesn't just swallow, it preserves. Wooden hulls may decay, but metal ingots can rest untouched beneath layers of sand, waiting like patient dragons. Modern divers off Cartagena discovered lead bars stamped with imperial marks, proof that shipments truly did sink. If lead survived 2 millennia, then why not gold? The thought teases both professionals and treasure hunters alike. Every ripple of sonar, every faint glint under silt whispers of Rome's missing fortunes. And yet time plays tricks. Was that shape beneath the waves a chest of coin, or just another stone wrapped in seaweed? The Romans themselves knew the dangers. Writers like Pliny the Elder catalogued storms, odd whirlpools, and what he called the treachery of the waters. Sailors believed in sea monsters not simply out of superstition, but because sometimes waves behaved with such violence they seemed alive. Whole crews vanished their ships, leaving only planks bobbing in the surf. And with them gone were the pay slips for soldiers, the savings of merchants, and the bribes intended for governors. Rome's economy was robust, but even it must have felt the sting of treasure gone astray. Losing a fleet wasn't just a maritime accident, it could ripple through markets and spark mutinies among underpaid legions. It's worth pausing to imagine the soldiers awaiting their gold. Picture a cohort stationed on the cold Rhine frontier stamping their feet against the chill, waiting for wages to jingle in their purses. Instead, silence. No ships arrived. Grumbling spread dice games grew sharper, and officers tried to distract men with extra drill. Soldiers have always had a gift for sarcasm. Sure, Rome rules the world, just not the tide. More than one mutiny in Roman history began not with ideology, but with missing pay. Gold lost at sea could spark rebellion on land, a truth that still sends shivers down the spines of historians reading between the lines. Yet curiously, official records remain vague. Rome was bureaucratic almost to obsession, leaving inscriptions for everything from aqueduct openings to who paid for the marble in a public toilet. But when it comes to missing treasure fleets, the silence is eerie. Was this deliberate? Historians still argue whether bureaucrats raced failures to preserve imperial dignity, or whether no such disaster was ever written down in the first place. Imagine the embarrassment of chiselling into stone. Public notice. Our treasury is now at the bottom of the sea, kindly adjust your expectations. Folklore took up where officialdom fell silent. Fishermen swore that on moonlit nights you could hear the faint clang of coins beneath the waves, as if restless ghosts still counted their lost pay. Coastal villagers told children not to swim too far, warning that the sea would lure them down with promises of Roman gold. Some even claimed fish scales shimmered unusually near wreck sites, as though gilded by what lay beneath. Quirky, yes, but it reveals how everyday people processed the mystery. When something vanishes, the imagination fills the void faster than any scribe. Modern salvage expeditions continue the chase. Companies with advanced technology drag the seafloor eyes fixed on sonar screens that might deliver the jackpot of all jackpots. And while lead amphorae and anchors appear, the gold itself remains elusive. The sea clings jealously to its secrets like a miser who refuses to open his purse. Perhaps that is why the legend grows stronger every failed search, deepens the conviction that the treasure is real, just waiting for the right set of eyes. As the waves roll endlessly, it's almost soothing to think of Rome's gold sleeping below, untouched by inflation, immune to thieves. Somewhere between Marseille and Iberia, or maybe nowhere near there at all, wealth enough to turn emperors pale lies hidden in the blue. The story whispers that the sea, not Rome, became the ultimate banker, and as listeners we lean closer, lulled by the surf, wondering if the next diver's hand will brush against a coin stamped with the face of a long-dead Caesar. The story now slides outward to the Adriatic, that long narrow stretch of sea, where Italy leans eastward toward the Balkans. The waters here can look deceptively gentle, turquoise shallows near the coast, deep sapphire further out, but storms rise suddenly like uninvited guests who refuse to leave. Roman merchant fleets knew this all too well. They packed their holds with amphorae of olive oil wine, and in some cases coins destined to pay soldiers or fund construction projects. The Adriatic may not be as legendary as the Aegean, or as vast as the Atlantic, but it has swallowed its fair share of ships. And here lies the possibility that Roman gold still sleeps under the waves, lost in a storm no poet bothered to sing about. One mainstream historical fact gives this a sturdy backdrop: Roman harbours along the Adriatic coast, especially places like Aquileia and Salona, were bustling hubs of trade and troop movement. Archaeologists have unearthed warehouses loading docks and inscriptions confirming the volume of goods that moved through them. It was not unusual for ships to carry mixed cargo grain, wine and sacks of coin all in one hull, because empire building required both sustenance and salary. Without pay, soldiers grew restless. Without supplies, they grew mutinous. A shipment lost at sea was not just a financial inconvenience, but sometimes a political crisis waiting to happen. Sailors, of course, told their own stories. One quirky tidbit recorded in later folklore claimed that sailors sometimes tossed a single gold coin overboard at the start of a voyage, an offering to Neptune to keep the rest safe. Practical, hard to say, but one imagines a captain watching his quartermaster frown, as precious money plunked into the water insurance policies have always stung a little. Some modern divers even claim to have found scattered coins near old trade routes, though skeptics note that coins travel easily, and a few here or there do not prove a lost treasury. Historians still argue whether one particular Roman pay ship vanished somewhere near modern Croatia, a vessel supposedly bound for garrisons along the Danube frontier. The written records are tantalizingly vague. A military report hints at delayed wages, while another document refers to unexpected shortages. Did a storm swallow the payroll, leaving soldiers unpaid and furious? Or was the money intercepted by opportunistic pirates? The Adriatic, with its maze of islands and coves, made piracy not just possible but lucrative. Some pirates even received unofficial tolerance from local communities, who happily bought the stolen goods at discount. Imagine it a Roman bireme or a heavier merchant galley fighting a sudden squall, the sea turning black waves slamming against the hull. Amphorae crack sacks split open, and a river of coins spills across the planks before vanishing through cracks into the deep. Men cling to ropes shouting prayers in Latin that the gods seem unwilling to hear. Perhaps some survived washing up on shingle beaches, but the gold did not. The Adriatic, patient and cold, kept its prize. Divers today continue to explore these waters, and the finds range from spectacular to almost comical. Whole amphorae lie encrusted with coral, their wine long replaced by seawater. Anchors sit like lonely monuments. And occasionally a diver surfaces with a Roman coin, the emperor's profile faint under centuries of salt. Each discovery whispers of a lost cargo, yet none has revealed the great hoards that legends promise. It is enough to keep the search alive, like a gambler convinced the next hand will win. Roman writers were not above dramatic flair, and they occasionally hinted at vanished shipments without naming specifics. One poet mocked a governor for losing more gold to the waves than he saved in taxes. Was it metaphor, or did everyone at the time nod knowingly about a certain shipwreck? We cannot say. What is clear is that maritime disasters were so frequent that they rarely made headlines in the sagas of the empire. After all, when you control most of the Mediterranean, the occasional lost ship is a rounding error, unless of course you were a soldier waiting on your paycheck. Archaeologists working near ancient Salona have uncovered stone breakwaters and mooring posts, evidence of how much activity clustered around these ports. The very scale of construction tells us that traffic was immense, and with immense traffic comes inevitable loss. If you've ever dropped your phone in the bathtub, you know how easy it is to lose something precious to water. Now scale that up to tons of coin packed into a wooden ship in a sudden gale, and you begin to sense how the Adriatic may still be guarding Rome's wealth. It is tempting to romanticize the missing treasure as one vast hoard lying intact in a broken hull, waiting for a lucky diver. Reality, though, might be less cinematic coins scattered across miles of seabed, spread thin by current and time. Some may have been retrieved by survivors, others collected centuries later by fishermen who noticed the odd shimmer in their nets. And yet hope persists that somewhere beneath layers of silt lies a chest or two, the wood rotted away but the metal gleaming stubbornly, emperors' faces staring upward into perpetual night. The Adriatic's reputation as both lifeline and hazard seeped into local legends. Fishermen told tales of ghost ships crewed by drowned Romans eternally rowing, but never reaching shore. Children whispered that golden fish swam in certain coves, their scales made from stolen coins. Modern historians dismissed these as colourful folklore, but they hint at a truth communities remembered loss in their own way. Where records failed, stories filled the gap, layering fact and fantasy, until the two became inseparable. And so the Adriatic keeps its silence. Scholars probe archives for hints of missing ships. Divers probe the depths for gleaming proof. Neither has yet yielded the certainty we crave. But perhaps that uncertainty is part of the allure. The thought that beneath the everyday waves, under the wake of ferries and fishing boats, there may rest the wages of an empire. The sea is not cruel, it simply does not care. Gold sinks, memory fades, and the waves keep rolling. They say the sea has a long memory, longer than empires, longer than kings, longer even than human arrogance. By the fifth section of our journey, the listener drifts further out into that memory, where the story of Rome's gold becomes less about coins and more about echoes of ambition. Rome, after all, did not rise on olive oil and marble alone, it rose on a tidal wave of wealth, and sometimes that wave sank beneath the waves themselves. Imagine the Mediterranean not as a placid holiday brochure sea, but as a bustling highway clogged with ships, each one groaning under cargo. Wheat from Egypt, wine from Gaul, marble from Greece, and yes, chest after chest of denarii and aurae, those shimmering golden tokens of imperial power. It is said that in certain seasons hundreds of vessels could be counted on the horizon. One unlucky storm was enough to turn treasure into flotsam. One pirate ambush, and a ship's glittering heart went to the deep. A mainstream fact comes into play here. Rome's economy depended heavily on imported grain, especially from North Africa. Without those ships, the city of 1 million souls would starve. This meant convoys sailed constantly escorted at times by warships, and the seas churned with commerce. Yet the more ships you launch, the more likely some will not return. Picture the scene: sailors fighting to steer in a gale amphorae, smashing like clay fireworks, and strongboxes tumbling into the hungry dark water. The bottom of the sea became in effect a second treasury, one Rome could never access again. But here's a quirky tidbit for you. Roman sailors often nailed little charms onto their ships, tiny bronze phalluses, carved hands, making rude gestures, even miniature Hercules clubs. These weren't decorative. They were meant to ward off evil eyes and bad luck. Whether they worked is questionable given the amount of gold still resting on the seabed, but they do prove one thing: even the toughest sailors liked their insurance policies, and not all of them came in the form of an admiral's escort. Historians still argue whether the sheer quantity of lost Roman treasure has been exaggerated by legend. After all, no one in the 1st century kept an Excel sheet of gold lost per storm, yet the archaeological record whispers that the legends have teeth. Dozens of Roman shipwrecks have been found off the coasts of Italy, Spain and Tunisia, some still holding amphorae filled with wine or oil. Every once in a while, divers discover a scattering of coins, their imperial faces blurred by 2,000 years of salt. It is not hard to extrapolate if minor cargo ships carried gold. Imagine what was lost when larger imperial convoys went down. The listener might picture this wealth not as neat stacks of coins, but as chaotic splashes of treasure. A chest cracks open on the seabed coins, spreading like autumn leaves across sand. Fish weave through them, utterly unimpressed. Crabs scuttle over emperors' faces, unconcerned with Caesar's dignity. The gold is still there, but its context has changed entirely, once a measure of imperial power, now a bedspread for marine life. The irony is sharp wealth, that was supposed to last forever, that was supposed to outlive kings and dynasties, lies in places where no one can spend it. It wasn't only nature that claimed the treasure. Pirates were the tax collectors of the sea, and they collected with alarming efficiency. The Mediterranean swarmed with them in the late Republic and early Empire, so much so that Pompey the Great was given extraordinary powers to clear them out in the 1st century BCE. He succeeded, but not before countless vessels vanished. A pirate ambush might not leave wreckage. Sometimes ships were sailed away and dismantled quietly, their cargo absorbed into pirate economies that had their own strange order. Somewhere out there in the silent arithmetic of history are treasures that were not drowned but stolen, yet they too disappeared into the fog of time. One can almost hear the bedtime sarcasm kicking in here. Imagine explaining to the emperor that the treasure is missing because a bunch of part-time seafaring freelancers decided to diversify their assets. Sorry, Augustus, your gold is gone, but hey, on the bright side, piracy builds character. Not the kind of line that makes it into the official annals. The sea, indifferent as always, kept its grip on the spoils. Every storm added more, every careless helmsman contributed a donation, and sometimes entire fleets disappeared. In AD 62, for example, an earthquake devastated Pompeii and the surrounding coast. Ships moored in harbours were swallowed in minutes, dragging cargo with them. Natural disasters like this remind us how fragile even the mighty Roman system was. Rome could pave roads across continents, but it could not out-argue a tsunami. Another debate persists: were there intentional sinkings of treasure? Some scholars propose that during times of political chaos, ships loaded with wealth were deliberately scuttled to prevent rivals from seizing them. Others scoff, insisting that sinking treasure on purpose is like throwing your paycheck into the shredder just to spite your boss. Yet the idea refuses to die. Perhaps somewhere under silt and coral lies the legacy of an imperial tantrum gold sent to the bottom, not by storm or sword, but by human spite. The imagery is powerful. The listener may now imagine the Mediterranean not as a blue surface, but as a dark vault filled with scattered relics. Lamps, amphorae, statues, coins and underwater Rome slumbering, while the landward Rome raged with politics and ambition. The thought itself makes the sea feel heavier. Next time you stand on a cliff overlooking waves, remember beneath that glitter is another glitter, one that hasn't seen sunlight since emperors walked marble halls. As the section closes, the narration drifts into a softer cadence, reminding the listener that silence has always been the sea's best defense. Sailors vanished, ships dissolved, records were forgotten, and gold slipped into anonymity. Yet the seabed still remembers, and if ears could press against water, they might hear the clink of coins shifted by currents faint as lullabies. The waters around the Italian peninsula roll dark and heavy, concealing more than the salt and silt of centuries. Sailors crossing these coasts in the years after Rome's imperial decline often whisper of glints beneath the waves, the sort of shimmer that does not belong to fish scales or shifting sandbars. They lean over the sides of their ships, straining to catch another glimpse, and swear that coins scatter across the seabed like autumn leaves. Some even insist that amphorae lie cracked open down there, the clay crumbling while the gold within rests untouched. Whether those glimmers are tricks of the sun, or truth rising briefly from the deep is anyone's guess, but it is precisely these whispers that feed the myth of treasure sleeping below. Imagine for a moment a battered galley of the late Empire, its crew fighting both storm and exhaustion. The cargo hold is stacked with sacks, each one groaning with coinage stamped by emperors whose names fade even then. A sudden squall lashes from nowhere, waves taller than rooftops pound against the hull, and the ship heels over, dumping its wealth into the ravenous sea. The men may survive clinging to planks, but the money that settles into the sand never to surface again, at least not until later generations dream about it. Sailors, being a superstitious breed, turn such disasters into warnings, never boast of wealth they say, or Neptune will claim it as his tithe. One mainstream fact underscores why the story refuses to drown. Ancient Roman coins remain among the most common finds along Mediterranean shores. Divers still recover bronze, silver, and even occasional gold aurae from shipwrecks their surfaces dulled, yet unmistakably Roman. These are not isolated curiosities. Museums from Spain to Turkey display entire collections of coin hoards lifted from beneath the sea. Every tangible recovery becomes fuel for the larger fire, suggesting that where a handful of coins is found, entire fortunes may lie just a little deeper, and yet there is a quirky tidbit to consider. Medieval fishermen sometimes tied charms to their nets, bits of coral or small figurines claiming these talismans kept them safe when dredging waters thought haunted by sunken Roman riches. Some even told tales of nets snagging on what felt like chest lids only to tear free and rise with nothing but seaweed. Whether exaggeration or not, it paints an image of the ocean as a jealous keeper of Rome's leftovers. Historians still argue whether such stories sprang from genuine encounters, or were simply entertaining tales spun to keep apprentices wide-eyed and obedient on long nights at sea. As centuries pass, the notion of golden wrecks grows into something larger than rumour. Sailors travelling between Sicily and North Africa repeat the story until it becomes a kind of shared cultural myth. Beneath the surface waits a treasury so vast that no king, pope or merchant could ever spend it all. Poets begin to weave it into their verses, half serious, half mocking, suggesting that the reason Rome's heirs forever struggle for cash is that their ancestors let it all sink. Imagine the irony, an empire famed for its aqueducts, baths and naval dominance, undone not by barbarians alone, but by the very element they claim to master. Of course, skeptics exist. Some argue the sea holds plenty of shipwrecks, but very little gold, since much of the empire's wealth was hoarded inland in temples or paid directly into barbarian hands. Yet even the skeptics cannot deny the allure. Gold has a way of making logic sweat. Tell someone that coins are found by chance in fishing nets, and suddenly the whole seabed transforms into a glittering vault in the mind's eye. It doesn't matter if reality is far duller if most wrecks hold amphorae of grain jars of fish sauce or bundles of wool. The possibility of even one chest keeps the myth buoyant. Think too of the psychological trick here. A lost coin is tragedy. A lost fortune is legend. If one farmer misplaces a few denarii, no one cares. But if a storm swallows an imperial ship laden with thousands of aureat, that becomes a story to retell for centuries. It is the difference between misplacing your lunch and misplacing an entire harvest. Scale transforms mishap into myth. And Rome, with its reputation for excess, provides the perfect stage for imagining treasures of impossible scale lying in the dark. The echoes of these tales ripple outward, reaching not just fishermen, but also early chroniclers, who enjoy inserting mystery into their histories. Some medieval writers claim divers occasionally recovered goblets or medallions engraved with emperors' profiles, shimmering proof that the seafloor is littered with reminders of vanished grandeur. Others spin stranger yarns. One insists that a chest dragged halfway up collapsed back into the deep, pulled down by hands unseen. Was that a metaphor for human greed, or merely a sailor's attempt to explain why his story lacked the gold to back it up? Historians still argue whether such accounts reflect kernels of truth, or were pure fables meant to keep listeners entertained. In the end, what matters is less the reality and more the persistence. Each glimpse of a coin, each rumour of a wreck becomes a bead on the string of a larger narrative, that Rome's fortune sleeps below patient and unreachable. The story gathers moss like a stone in a river rolling from one generation to the next, until it becomes smooth, solid, and impossible to ignore. And so the legend of submerged Roman treasure swells not as a single tale of a single wreck, but as a chorus echoing across the coasts of the Mediterranean. The waves, steady and indifferent, seem almost complicit in the silence, guarding what may or may not lie beneath. Sailors keep telling their stories, children keep leaning in to listen, and somewhere down below the silt keeps its secrets undisturbed. The question that lingers, pulling dreamers closer, is simple. If so much of Rome's wealth truly went to sea, why has so little been pulled back up? Storms sweep across the Mediterranean, and with them go the whispers of Roman treasure. Sailors glance at the sky, noting how clouds gather like soldiers in formation, and they mutter about wrecks that still bleed gold into the sea whenever waves churn the seabed. The image is vivid enough to keep men awake at night, imagining a chest split open by a storm coin spilling like fish scales in the dark. To the Romans, the Mediterranean is both lifeline and predator, giving passage to wealth and clawing it away without warning. Modern divers still argue that storms are as much culprits in treasure stories as human greed for the seabed is littered with reminders that even mighty Rome cannot dictate terms to the weather. The thought might make you reconsider your next cruise holiday. No lifeboat, no buffet, just Poseidon deciding whether you're tonight's snack. The mainstream historical fact here is plain enough. Roman sea trade is monumental in scope, with amphorae found from Spain to the Levant, testifying to roots that bind the empire tighter than its roads ever could. These jars once carried olive oil wine and garum the fish sauce Romans loved so much you'd be forgiven for gagging just hearing about it. Archaeologists often find amphorae stacked like honeycombs in wrecks, frozen in neat rows beneath centuries of silt. They look so intact it's easy to imagine sailors scrambling just before disaster, abandoning their precious cargo to the waves. What makes the treasure stories linger is not only the cargo, but the promise that beneath the amphorae lie stronger boxes, caskets with coins, bars of bullion, or the pay chests of legions bound for distant frontiers. Storms that snatched ships whole also snatched futures, leaving us to imagine wealth suspended in eternal twilight. Among the quirkier details preserved in Roman lore is the superstition that certain harbours are cursed. Sailors claim that some bays swallow more ships than others even on calm days, as if the sea remembers grudges. One Roman author joked that Neptune's favourite hobby was collecting amphorae, perhaps because the god could never get enough of that pungent fish sauce. Historians still argue whether these cursed harbours are simply places with treacherous undercurrents, or whether sailors retold every accident until it sounded like divine sabotage. The result is the same, a reputation that could make a whole fleet steer a longer route just to avoid a particular coastline. For those who braved them anyway, the sea sometimes offered up payment in silver wreckage. Picture a convoy of Roman grain ships leaving Alexandria, the holds stuffed with Egyptian wheat, meant to keep the city of Rome alive through winter. The lead vessel hits a sudden squall, the kind that drives rain sideways and makes sails flap like shredded parchment. The fleet scatters men screaming prayers in Latin and Greek alike, anchors snapping their chains as if they were threads. Somewhere in that chaos, one ship founders its hull cracking under the combined force of wind and wave. Chests lashed tight to the deck slide, loose breaking open as the vessel tilts. Coins scatter into black water, spiralling down into sand where the storm cannot follow. Imagine being the sailor who survived crawling onto a beach with nothing but his wet tunic, knowing that a fortune now sleeps beneath the sea's shifting blanket. You can understand why survivors kept the story alive, repeating it until rumour turned into legend. There is also the matter of Roman insurance, or rather the lack of it. Merchants sometimes share risk by splitting cargoes, but when a single storm wipes out a ship, the loss is personal and devastating. Letters preserved on wax tablets reveal men begging partners to forgive debts, explaining that Poseidon took their goods before creditors could. Some scholars speculate that the stories of hidden treasure arise not from real recovery, but from desperate attempts to soften financial ruin. Don't worry, the gold isn't gone, it's just resting under the sea. Whether or not anyone believed it, the excuse carried a curious kind of comfort, even as coins slipped deeper into mud. Storms also feed into the romance of lost legions. Tales surface of entire pay chests vanishing when transport ships are swallowed by sudden squalls. Soldiers waiting on distant shores never receive their wages and mutiny brews. Imagine a garrison in Britannia, cold and damp, expecting fresh payment in gleaming denarii, only to hear that their silver is now fish food. Historians still argue whether mutinies trace back to such maritime losses or to politics closer to Rome, but the timing often tempts speculation. A storm in Sicily might spark unrest at Hadrian's Wall months later, the ripple effect of gold gone missing in an instant. Another quirky tidbit is that storms themselves are sometimes described as battles between gods. Roman poets write of Neptune hurling his trident of Juno, whipping up waves in revenge against Jupiter's favourites of winds, fighting each other like drunken gladiators. These tales blur natural disaster with divine theatre giving storms narrative teeth. If treasure goes missing in such battles, it feels less like misfortune and more like tribute stolen by the divine. Sailors may not have liked it, but at least it gave them someone to curse. And storms do not just erase, they also reveal. On rare occasions, tempestuous seas scour the seabed and toss coins onto beaches where locals stumble upon them like seashells. Such finds fuel belief that whole wrecks lie just beyond reach waiting for luckier hands. A farmer in antiquity might plough his field only to find gold that once rattled inside a legionary pay chest. Did it wash ashore in a storm? Did someone bury it in panic? The ambiguity breeds more tales than certainty ever could. In thinking of these storms, recall earlier, the crocodile dung sunscreen, how trivial details survive, while whole communities vanish. Here too the sea seems to decide what stays visible and what slips away. 1,000 amphorae may sleep unbroken, while a single coin gleams under moonlight, baiting the next generation of treasure seekers. The paradox of Roman storms is that they destroy lives yet preserve artifacts freezing moments in time under silt, while sweeping stories into silence. Storms continue to hum through the narrative like a background drumbeat. They are both villain and archivist, snuffing out lives while hiding clues for archaeologists centuries later. Modern divers sifting through wrecks off Malta, Cyprus and Sicily still pull up cargo that testifies to this duality trade collapsed in an instant, but history preserved in ceramic and coin. The gold of Rome sleeps where storms tucked it away waiting for curious eyes. And perhaps that is the greatest irony, whether indifferent and wild ends up writing part of Rome's legacy chapter by violent chapter across the seabed. Treasure does not always stay where it is placed, and in the restless centuries after Rome's collapse, the Mediterranean became a chessboard of kingdoms, empires and opportunists, with more ambition than seaworthy ships. Storms scattered fleets, pirates prowled, and old Roman ports fell into ruin their harbours, silting up until even the gulls gave up on them. In such turbulence, the possibility that Rome's lost gold was not resting peacefully in one watery grave but shifting from one site to another gained strength. Imagine a chest sliding down a sandbank during an earthquake, tumbling into deeper blackness, or a sandbar gradually uncovering a scatter of coins, only for the next storm to bury them again. The sea is both vault and thief, generous with clues one season and pitilessly erasing them the next. Anyone expecting tidy archaeological layers probably also expects their Wi-Fi to work at the bottom of the Tyrrhenian Sea. Spoiler, it doesn't. The mainstream historical fact that anchors this drift is the sheer continuity of maritime traffic. Long after the Roman Senate lost its last authority, Roman roads decayed, and the legions became memory ships still sailed across the same waters. Byzantine merchants, Arab traders and Norman raiders all threaded the same coasts often, recycling Roman ruins for their own fortresses. In Sicily, stone blocks from imperial villas appear in medieval castles, and in North Africa, Roman mosaics were walked upon by Fatimid governors. The continuity of settlement means any cache of Roman gold hidden at sea would have been brushed past over and around countless times without anyone knowing. The Adriatic and Tyrrhenian in particular are graveyards layered with centuries of wrecks. If you think your attic is cluttered, picture the Mediterranean seabed coins, from Augustus lying beside pottery, from Crusaders, all tangled in fishing nets abandoned last summer. Quirky tidbits cling to this layered chaos. Off the coast of Croatia, divers once reported finding amphorae filled not with wine or oil, but with strange lumps of resin hardened like golden honeycombs. Some speculate these were raw materials for ancient perfumes or incense. Others swear they were simply spoiled batches of pine pitch. Still, the divers laughed at how treasure hunters expecting coins were stuck, sniffing 2,000-year-old tree sap instead. Another tale tells of fishermen off southern Italy who dredged up Roman coins in their nets, only to complain that the coins tore holes in the mesh. To them, the money was an annoyance, not a miracle. For every golden dreamer, there is always a practical sailor muttering that they'd rather catch tuna than bronze. Historians still argue whether much of Rome's imperial wealth ever truly sank at all. Some say the vast treasuries of Rome were steadily drained by paying mercenaries, bribing barbarians, and maintaining decadent courts, until almost nothing was left to lose. Others insist enormous quantities must have been hidden whether on land or at sea, because the sheer size of the empire suggests reserves too immense to vanish in wages and taxes. The truth is slippery. Some caches surface hoards of silver near Pompeii or jars of coins buried in Gaul. But the gold of Rome, the symbolic wealth of emperors, often seems to whisper from under waves rather than shout from excavation pits. One modern perspective sees the sea as a collaborator in memory. Human archives of selective sagas forget winter camps, medieval monks omit pagan rituals, and even marble inscriptions crumble away. But the seabed preserves oddly well. A bronze statue toppled into the sea may emerge centuries later with its expression intact green with corrosion, yet still recognisable. Wooden ships rot, yes, but amphorae cling to their shapes. Coins settle heavy and wait for the patient hand of a diver. The silence of sagas can be counterbalanced by the stubborn endurance of sediment. The ocean may be chaotic, but it does not editorialise. If Rome's gold lies beneath it, the waves do not care whether the Senate thought the story flattering or not. And then comes the strange modern twist technology has made the seabed legible in ways emperors never dreamed. Sonar sweeps map the contours of ancient harbours, magnetometers ping against iron anchors buried under silt, and remotely operated vehicles peer into blackness with robotic patience. Entire industries now exist not just to recover modern cargo, but to sniff out ancient treasures. The line between archaeology and treasure hunting is thin, sometimes invisible. For every university project carefully cataloguing amphora fragments, there's a crew of fortune seekers hoping to pay off their debts with one lucky dive. To be fair, if you had to choose between cataloguing barnacle-covered shards or hauling up a chest of gold coins, you might also lean toward the second option. Picture now a small boat bobbing off the Amalfi Coast modern divers easing backward into the surf. Their bubbles rise in a silver column vanishing into the ripples above. Beneath them, darkness opens into a graveyard of stone blocks and timbers. Here a column drum lies tilted there, a scatter of tiles, and further off the glint of something metallic, though usually it's just a corroded nail. The divers descend slowly, their lamps cutting cones through the water, imagining each faint mound as a chest waiting to be opened. And in those moments the past feels unnervingly close. A diver's hand brushes the silt and coins spill upward like leaves in reverse, refusing to stay buried. The persistence of Rome's lost wealth in the imagination owes as much to absence as to presence. When gold is actually found, it often ends up locked in museums, catalogued into anonymity. But when gold is rumoured, when it flickers at the edge of certainty, when scholars hedge their bets, when divers hint without confirming, it becomes immortal. Every failure to confirm becomes an invitation to dream. That is why the story of Rome's treasure under the waves refuses to die. Its absence is more nourishing than its presence. The less we can pin down, the more the imagination sails onward. And so, the narrative drifts from storms to sailors, from amphorae to sonar scans, circling the same absence like gulls wheeling over a wave. The gold is there or not there. It may lie in a single heap under sand or be scattered in glimmers across the seabed. Historians still argue whether it is an episode we should call a tragedy of loss, a myth of greed, or a story of persistence. But in the end, the truth does not matter as much as the endurance of the mystery. Rome's wealth remains less an economic quantity than a lingering echo, a shimmer beneath the waves that continues to pull eyes seaward. Scholars debate the gold of Rome as though it were a ghostly guest at a banquet, always talked about, never seen, always invited, but never arriving. They spread out maps in conference halls, their fingers tracing ancient routes across the Mediterranean, pointing to possible sites where treasure-laden ships may have slipped beneath the waves. One mainstream fact they like to repeat sometimes with the air of conjurers producing a coin from thin air is that the Mediterranean was the superhighway of the Roman Empire. Grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, olive oil from Hispania, spices funneled from the east, all coursed through those waters, and where there is cargo there is risk. Shipwrecks pepper the seabed like breadcrumbs, and each one could in theory hide the gleam of Roman gold. Divers in modern times have brought up amphorae by the hundreds, each shaped like a fat-bellied vase, each once filled with oil or wine. Some still smell faintly of the contents, the ancient equivalent of spilled groceries left too long in a bag. Imagine finding 2,000-year-old olive oil. It's not exactly the gourmet delicacy you'd want drizzled on your salad. Yet in between these amphorae coins occasionally appear scattered as though Poseidon himself liked to shake the purses of unfortunate sailors. A quirky tidbit emerges from a wreck discovered off the coast of Corsica. Among the cargo were bronze statues, one of which was missing its head. Later divers joked that the head probably rolled into some fish's living room and became an eccentric centerpiece. These finds remind us that treasures do surface, but they also tease us with incompleteness. Gold hoards are rumoured, but what surfaces are fragments, glimpses, half-stories that stir more questions than they settle. Historians still argue whether whole shiploads of Roman bullion ever truly went missing, or whether such tales are exaggerations woven by later storytellers hungry for mystery. But the stories refuse to die. Off the coast of Sicily, fishermen whisper of glints beneath their nets, flashes of sunlight bouncing back from coins. Most of the time it's just fish scales, but the whispers add up. Local legends evolve. In one telling a storm lashed a Roman fleet carrying tax revenues back to Rome, and the sea swallowed them whole. In another, the gods themselves, angry at human arrogance, drag the gold beneath the waves as punishment. And because sailors are sailors, each tale grows more dramatic the farther it travels from shore. By the time it reaches a tavern in Naples, the story involves sea serpents, lightning, and a curse that strikes down any diver foolish enough to hunt the treasure. Meanwhile, archaeologists attempt to bring sobriety to the conversation. They catalogue wrecks, study currents, and analyse ancient texts. They point out that the Romans shipped massive amounts of bullion during times of crisis. Soldiers needed pay, provinces demanded bribes, enemies sometimes needed to be bought off. It is not impossible, they admit, that a few ships carrying gold sank without recovery. Yet here comes the rub the sea preserves and destroys in equal measure. Wood rots, iron rusts, and even coins scatter across sandbars carried by tides until they vanish into miles of seabed. A hoard can dissolve not into myth, but into mere geology. Still humans cling to the possibility. A modern fringe theory insists that divers in the 1960s stumbled upon a Roman wreck brimming with ingots, but governments hushed it up to prevent looting. Another version claims that the Vatican secretly retrieved lost imperial treasure centuries ago, funneling it into church coffers. Both stories carry the aroma of conspiracy, the kind that makes documentaries popular, and scholars sigh loudly into their coffee mugs. Historians still argue whether these rumours deserve dismissal, or whether even a grain of truth hides within them. The mystery is further stoked by the geography itself. The Mediterranean is not a quiet pond, but a restless shifting space. Earthquakes tilt the seabed volcanoes like Vesuvius and Etna shower ash, and sudden storms hammer ships with little warning. Modern sailors know the danger. Ancient ones knew it better. A storm in the wrong channel could scatter fleets, send hulls crashing into hidden reefs, and reduce the proudest vessel into planks and prayers. For a ship carrying gold, the ocean floor becomes both vault and tomb. In one dramatic case off the coast of Israel, divers found coins stamped with the image of emperors lying in heaps, as if a chest had burst open. The discovery made headlines, but even then the amounts were modest compared to the fantastical visions of whole shiploads of gold. It is a reminder that reality often lags behind imagination. Yet the mind resists moderation. We picture not handfuls of coins, but mountains, great troves gleaming in the dark, waiting for the right hands or the right madness to claim them. Quirky folklore keeps pace with science. Along the Amalfi coast there is a story of dolphins that guard Roman treasure, refusing to let divers approach. In Sardinia, elders claim that some beaches glitter with grains of gold after storms remnants of ships lost long ago. Whether you believe them or not, the persistence of these tales reveals something deeper. The sea does not easily give up what it takes, and so absence becomes a canvas for imagination. The debate spills beyond academia into popular culture. Novels, films, even video games feature the trope of lost Roman gold. Audiences thrill to the idea that somewhere beneath the waves lies a vault that history forgot. The irony, of course, is that the mystery itself may be more valuable than the treasure. If the hoard were ever found, carefully catalogued and locked in a museum, it might lose the allure it has carried for centuries. The unknown keeps the glow brighter than any polished coin. So the question lingers heavier than an anchor, and lighter than a rumour: did Rome truly lose its gold to the sea? Or did later generations simply plant the idea, because every empire deserves a ghost story? The answer remains elusive, like a coin glimpsed in sand just before the tide rushes in. For now, the gold sleeps, or perhaps it never slept at all. Either way, the sea keeps its secrets, and humanity keeps its hunger for what may lie just out of reach. The waves roll on, centuries piling atop one another like tides, stacking sand on a forgotten beach, and still the whispers about Rome's drowned wealth refuse to fade. From fishermen casting their nets in the Adriatic, to scholars hunched over manuscripts in candlelit libraries, the legend curls like smoke, intangible, faintly acrid, impossible to pin down. People love treasure, of course. Humans can't resist a good story about piles of glittering coins waiting just beneath their toes, as if a quick dive with a rusty bucket could turn them into emperors overnight. But there's more here than greed. There's an ache, an unfinished sentence in the book of history, a suspicion that Rome's last words might still be echoing in some hidden cavern beneath the sea. Modern historians circle the tale like gulls above a fishing boat. Some lean toward practicality, pointing out that shipwrecks were as common as headaches in the ancient world. Roman supply vessels stacked high with grain amphorae of olive oil, or yes, the occasional chest of coins could easily founder in storms. In fact, archaeologists dredging the Mediterranean have uncovered wrecks loaded with cargo ceramics from Spain, marble slabs from Greece, even jars of garum fish sauce that somehow survived 2 millennia sealed and pungent. Imagine cracking one of those open. You probably wouldn't survive the smell, let alone the taste. So it's not impossible that Roman gold sits under the waves. What is debated is whether it lies in organised hoards or just scattered bits of everyday loss. The legend's heart beats stronger in the darker interpretations. One quirky tidbit repeated in medieval chronicles describes a forbidden reef near Sicily, where sailors claimed to see lights under the water like torches marching across the seabed. Some swore those were the spirits of drowned legionaries guarding imperial treasure. Others rolled their eyes, muttering it was more likely drunken hallucinations caused by bad wine and worse cheese. Historians still argue whether such stories reflect garbled accounts of volcanic activity. Sicily does have more than its fair share of fiery geology, or whether they are proof that the legend was already morphing into folklore long before Renaissance writers polished it into glittering myth. Meanwhile, divers in modern times continue to chase the shimmer. Along the coastlines of Italy and North Africa, expeditions lower cameras and sonar arrays, sweeping the seabed for any hint of human handiwork. Sometimes they find the real thing, anchors corroded into shapes that look like giant claws, amphorae clustered like sleeping bees, even mosaics from villas now drowned by shifting shorelines. Each discovery whispers of life abruptly interrupted, of a dinner table left mid-meal when the ground gave way. And each time someone inevitably asks the question if villas and jars survived. Where are the coins? Where are the chests sealed tight with wax and iron, stamped with the eagle of Rome? The silence beneath the waves answers with the patience of eternity. It's here that the mystery deepens, because the Romans were meticulous record keepers. They tallied grain distributions, soldier salaries, temple expenditures. If a major shipment of bullion sank, surely it should have been noted somewhere. Yet in the ledgers and chronicles that survive, there are only tantalizing hints, vague references to losses at sea, complaints about shortages, sudden shifts in provincial treasuries. Nothing that says outright, oh, by the way, 2 million sesterces are lying off Capri, please send a snorkel. Historians still argue whether this silence is coincidence, a gap in preservation, or deliberate omission, because admitting that such wealth was lost might have undermined imperial authority. After all, it's hard to project eternal strength when your gold is sitting in Neptune's pocket. The human imagination rushes to fill the void. Renaissance poets conjured visions of entire galleons glinting beneath the waves, guarded by sirens who lured the greedy to their doom. Romantic painters sketched stormy canvases where faint shapes of marble columns and golden statues shimmered under green glass seas. Even in our own age, movies and novels recycle the theme Rome's drowned gold as a metaphor for ambition, folly, or the eternal hunger for more. You might say the treasure has already paid out in cultural currency, even if the coins themselves remain out of reach. And really, when was the last time you got this much mileage out of your old savings account? The skeptics naturally shrug. They point out that most Roman coinage in circulation was made of silver or bronze, not solid gold. The empire was rich, yes, but gold was often reserved for high ceremonial issues, military bonuses, or diplomatic gifts. The bulk of economic life clinked along in less glamorous metal. So when you imagine heaps of golden coins glittering on the seabed, you may be picturing Hollywood more than history. Still, the absence of proof is not proof of absence. Even a few lost chests would be enough to spark the kind of fever that keeps divers, dreamers, and bedtime storytellers awake at night. One of the most fascinating debates hinges on geography. Some argue the treasure lies near the Bay of Naples, where volcanic tremors could have swallowed coastal storehouses whole. Others insist it must be near Alexandria, the breadbasket of Rome where fleets departed laden with wealth. And a few whisper about the Black Sea, pointing to obscure references in Byzantine texts about the emperor's gold vanishing in a storm. Historians still argue whether these are legitimate leads or just examples of everyone wanting the legend to dock in their own backyard. It's a bit like claiming Atlantis, who doesn't want the tourist revenue, yet beneath the layers of speculation lies a quieter truth. Whether the gold exists physically or not, it has already carved a place in our collective story. It represents Rome's grandeur, its reach across continents, and its fragility in the face of forces it could not control. It also mirrors our own restlessness, our desire to keep searching, to keep asking, to keep believing that just over the next horizon something extraordinary waits. That restless hum is the real treasure, the spark that keeps historians, digging divers plunging, and listeners like you leaning in closer even as your eyelids grow heavy. So picture it now as the narration slows. A storm-dark sea rolling endlessly under the moon. Somewhere down there perhaps lies a chest stamped with an eagle coin stacked in neat rows waiting. Or perhaps there is only sand and amphorae, the gold long since melted down the story stronger than the substance. Either way, the waves keep their secrets and the mystery survives because it is unsolved. And in that unsolved space, imagination flourishes brighter than gold deeper than the sea. The waves hush, the story loosens, and the restless search begins to drift into quiet. The gold of Rome, whether waiting under the sea or dissolved into memory, no longer feels urgent. What matters is the calm that follows when questions are set aside. The sea itself, vast and patient, teaches this lesson: not everything must be solved tonight. Some mysteries are meant to rest like shells buried in the sand, only glinting when the tide chooses to uncover them. Breathe with the rhythm of those waves, now slow and even. Each exhale carries away the heavy armour of curiosity. Each inhale draws in a lighter stillness. The bustling campfires of Roman soldiers, the storm-tossed decks of galleys, the libraries of scholars debating their fate, those voices fade further into the distance. They become no louder than the wind that rustles across forgotten harbours. You are left with the soundless hush of snow on stone, or moonlight pouring gently across water. The imagination does not need to chase coins anymore. It can rest with the knowledge that the story itself is treasure enough. Just as the Romans measured their days in tally marks and amphorae, so too can you measure this evening by its quiet closing. The mystery does not vanish. It waits steady and unchanged like a lighthouse far across the horizon. You can leave it there glowing faintly, ready to greet you when your mind returns to wonder another night. Now let your shoulders sink, your thoughts soften. The night sky arches above a scatter of stars more enduring than any empire. The sea beneath is calm, and so is your breathing. This is the silence that protects rather than frightens, a hush that holds you safe. Rest in it as the gold rests in its mystery.